On July 20th, 1985, there was a small boat named Don't Tell sitting over a very ordinary spot in the ocean west of the Florida Keys. There was no island, no mark on the map, and no open wooden chest with gold sparkling out of it like in pirate movies. But under the water, one of the divers saw a sight that almost no one had seen for over 360 years. Silver bars? Not just one or two bars. There was a massive amount of them piled on top of each other, to the point that the crew members later described the place as if it were a coral reef made of silver. And moments later, a message came through on the device that simply meant, "We finally found it." After 16 years of searching, they were finally standing over the main cargo of a Spanish ship named Atucha. But the strange thing is that the moment we consider the end of the story today was actually the last chapter in a hunt that began more than 3 centuries before Mel Fisher. Let's go back to the year 1622. At that time, the Spanish Empire was transporting vast wealth from its colonies in America towards Spain, using massive naval fleets. And the ships weren't just carrying gold and silver. They contained coins, copper, tobacco, timber, dyes, goods, and personal belongings of passengers who were returning to Spain. I mean, don't imagine the Atucha as a pirate ship with 2 chests of gold hidden under the bed. Imagine it like a massive bank vault, a cargo warehouse, and a passenger ship, all packed inside one wooden hull, trying to cross the Atlantic Ocean. On September 1st, 1622, the fleet left the port of Havana in Cuba, heading towards Spain, but there was a major problem. It was hurricane season. And shortly after they departed, the weather turned quickly, the winds picked up, the waves rose, and a powerful hurricane began pushing the ships toward the dangerous waters around the Florida Keys. Back in those days, ships didn't have engines to fight the wind like they do today. If a storm pushed you toward shallow waters or rocks, sometimes there was nothing you could do but try to lower the sails and wait, and see if the ship would hold up. In this hurricane, several ships sank or were wrecked, and among them was the Atucha. There were approximately 265 people on the ship, sailors, soldiers, passengers, and enslaved people. And when the ship crashed and sank, almost everyone who was on it went down with it. Only 5 people survived. 5 out of 265 managed to stay above the surface of the sea after clinging to a piece of the ship's mast that was visible above the water. As for the rest, they disappeared with the ship and its cargo. But there is an important detail here. The location of the Atucha was not lost at the beginning. The people who arrived after the disaster knew roughly where it sank, and a part of the ship was still visible. Meaning the problem wasn't that they didn't know where it was, the problem was that they weren't able to reach inside it. The ship settled on the seabed at a depth of about 17 meters. And today, 17 meters isn't considered a terrifying depth for a diver with modern equipment, but we are talking about the 17th century. There were no modern air tanks or breathing apparatuses that would let you stay underwater and work comfortably. I mean, imagine the irony. The treasure was almost right in front of them, but they couldn't reach it. And Spain, of course, wasn't just going to say, "Oh, well, the ship sank and the money's gone." Because the cargo that was under the sea wasn't just the property of a few rich people. It contained wealth directly tied to the Spanish Empire. So they started rescue attempts. They sent ships, they tried diving, and started searching through the wreckage. There was another ship that sank in the same disaster called the Santa Margarita. And from that ship, the Spanish were able to recover some of the valuables over the following years. So the search wasn't completely impossible, but the Atucha was a different story. Shortly after the initial aftermath, a new hurricane hit the area, and the ship was already sunk. The disaster this time was in the same place. The sand shifted, the wreckage pieces were scattered, parts of the ship were buried, and other parts drifted far from the original sinking site. So the Spanish were no longer looking for a whole ship in a clear spot. They were now chasing the trail of a ship and the sea was erasing this trail little by little. Every new storm could bury a cannon, move a chest, shift an ingot, or cover a part of the ship under a new layer of sand. And as the years passed, the search became harder and more expensive. And eventually, the salvage attempts stopped. A generation passed, then another, and then decades. And the Atucha turned from a lost ship into a story found in old papers. But this is where the thing that would bring the Atucha back to life after more than 300 years happened. Because the sea was able to hide the ship, but it couldn't hide the documents. In Spain, shipping records were found. Names of ships, quantities of cargo, shipwreck reports, and correspondence from people who lived through the disaster itself. And after more than 3 centuries, a researcher named Eugene Lyon appeared, a man who sat among thousands of old documents and started reading reports written by people who had died hundreds of years ago. And he was looking for one thing: any detail, no matter how small, that could help locate the Atucha. And here, a very strange chase began. A man searching for the ship in papers, and another man searching for it on the seabed. And the second man's name was Mel Fisher. Mel wasn't an archaeologist, and he wasn't a millionaire with a fleet of ships, but he was obsessed with diving. And over time, diving was no longer just a hobby for him. It became a job. And almost his entire life became tied to the sea. And when he learned the story of the Atocha, he became convinced that the ship wasn't a legend, and that a large part of its cargo might still be there under the sand. In 1969, he and his team began the serious search. And this is where the phase begins that really shows just how crazy the whole thing was. Because searching for a sunken ship isn't like looking for a car you sold. You aren't looking for a whole, clear object. The ship had been underwater for over 300 years. The wood had disintegrated, sand had covered parts of it, and currents and hurricanes had scattered the wreckage. Meaning, practically speaking, Mel wasn't looking for the ship itself. He was looking for traces of it. A cannon, a coin, a piece of metal, anything that could tell him to keep going in that direction. And to search larger areas, they used devices that could detect the presence of metals under the seabed. But even when the device gives a signal, that doesn't mean you found treasure. It could be a modern piece of iron. It could be the wreckage of another ship. And you might spend hours moving sand, and in the end, find nothing related to the Atocha. And this happened to them a lot. Days, weeks, and sometimes months, without finding anything important. But Mel had a phrase he repeated almost every day. He would tell them, "Today is the day." Meaning, maybe today specifically is the day we'll find the ship. Imagine hearing that sentence every morning. A week goes by, a month, a year, and then another year. And every day the same thing. Today is the day. And you come back at the end of the day having nothing. This is where most people would stop. But Mel didn't stop. Because over time, the search was no longer based on luck alone. The information that Eugene Lyon was pulling from the archives started to narrow down the search area. And in the spring of 1971, they reached an area they strongly believed was part of the Atocha's wreckage. But they still didn't have definitive proof until 1973. In that year, the team pulled 3 silver bars from the sea. And this is where the story took a new turn, because the bars had markings and numbers on them. And when they compared these markings with the old Atocha cargo manifests, they matched. Meaning, for the first time, they had very strong evidence that they weren't searching in a random place. They were actually on the Atocha's wreckage. After about 4 years of searching, the sea gave them its first clear answer. Not the whole treasure, just a small message. You're close. But being close didn't mean the main cargo was directly beneath them. The ship had broken apart and things were scattered over a large area. So they started treating every discovery like a piece of a puzzle. They'd find a piece here and record its location, then move a little and find another piece. It was as if the ship had left a trail of wreckage behind it on the seabed, and the team was following it step by step. And in 1975, the biggest discovery up to that moment arrived. Mel Fisher's son, Dirk Fisher, and the search team found 5 bronze cannons linked to the Atocha. After nearly 6 years of searching, the silver appeared, the cannons appeared, and the trail of the wreckage became clearer. And there was a feeling that the main cargo might be very close. And this was supposed to be the best phase of the project. But just days after this discovery, the story turned completely upside down. Dirk was on one of the search team's boats with his wife, Angel, and with them was a diver named Rick Gage. The boat capsized and sank, and the 3 of them died. Mel's son, his son's wife, and one of his team members. 3 people gone in an instant. And here, the Atocha was no longer just a treasure that could make Mel rich. There was something buried in this place more precious than gold itself. His son died while he was searching for it. And any person in such a moment might say, enough. 6 years of searching, money gone, years gone, and now my son is gone too. And honestly, this is where the story of the Atocha could have ended completely. Mel could have sold his equipment, gone back home, and said that the treasure, no matter how valuable, was no longer worth it. But what happened was that the search didn't stop. Mel decided to continue. And this decision alone makes the story more complex than just a tale of a greedy guy chasing after gold. Because if he continued, some people would say he was obsessed, and if he stopped, all the years that had passed and all the evidence they have found, and even the last discovery his son was a part of, would remain without an ending. So he continued. But the sea wasn't the only problem. On land, another battle began. The state of Florida was saying almost explicitly, even if you find the treasure, it doesn't mean it's all yours. At one point, there was an agreement to give Mel's team 75% of the recovered items, and the state would take 25%. But the dispute grew, and the question became, who actually has the right to the wreckage? Mel? Florida? Or the government? The case dragged on for years until it reached the U.S. Supreme Court in 1982. The final result was a significant win for Mel's team and a heavy blow to Florida's claims. I mean, after years of fighting under the sea, he was now fighting in the courts too. And at the same time, the search didn't stop. And in 1980, they achieved a very important victory. Not from the Atocha itself, but from the other ship that sank, the Santa Margarita. Mel's team found a large quantity of gold and precious artifacts belonging to it. And here, the project that many people saw as a crazy chase was actually pulling gold out of the sea. But for Mel, the value of this discovery was greater than the gold itself. Because if he could find the Santa Margarita, it means the search method is working. The old records are working, the debris field analysis is working, and the Atocha must be out there. But the Atocha remained stubborn. 1982 passed, and then 1983, and then 1984. And Mel was now almost into the 16th year of the chase. Imagine, 16 years of waking up in the morning with the same idea. Maybe today we'll find it, and by night you return, and you haven't found it. There's a family that lived there years around this ship. People invested. There's a whole crew working. And on top of all that, Mel is still carrying the loss of his son Dirk. I mean, even if he found the Atocha in the end, the victory could no longer be complete. But the search continued, and in the summer of 1985, the team focused on an area of the debris trail they were convinced could lead to the main part of the ship. One of the search boats was named Dauntless, and its captain was Mel's other son, Kane Fisher. On the morning of July 20th, 1985, the team went out to work just like any other day. No one knew if anything would turn up, or if it would just be another day added to the thousands of days that came before it. They anchored the boat. They started clearing the sand, and the divers went down. At first, sand, rocks, and scattered debris. And then the edge of a long object appeared under the sand. The diver got closer. The sand started to clear away, and a silver bar appeared. And next to it, another one. And then a third. But when they widened the area, it became clear that they weren't just looking at a few lost pieces. The seabed itself was full of silver. Ingots after ingots. Quantities they hadn't seen anything like at any previous stage. That was when Keene understood that this time it was different. This wasn't just a new sign telling them to keep going. This wasn't just another piece of the path. After 16 years, they had reached the place they were looking for. Keene grabbed the radio and contacted his father. And the message was simple. We found it, July 20th, 1985. The day Mel had spent years saying, "Today's the day." And finally, that day had arrived. And what was beneath the divers wasn't just a box of gold. The amount was much larger than that. It's more than 1,000 silver bars, more than 100,000 silver coins, gold, jewelry, emeralds, and items that had remained under the sea since 1622. And in a single moment, the man who had spent 16 years chasing small pieces on the seabed was now standing over one of the most famous maritime treasures of the modern era. But here comes the final surprise. Because despite everything they found, Fisher's team remained convinced that an important part of the Atocha was still missing. The stern of the ship, which contained the captain's quarters, some passengers' belongings, and valuable items, was never fully found, meaning that after all the silver, all the gold, and all the jewelry, there could be another part still under the sand, and that's why the search continued, even after Mel Fisher passed away in 1998. And today, when you hear figures like $400 or $450 million for the value of the Atocha treasure, don't treat it as a fixed number. The value of such a discovery isn't just the weight of the gold and silver. A 400-year-old coin might have a historical and market value much higher than the value of the metal itself. And the items that were recovered from the ship weren't all treasures in the conventional sense. There were tools, weapons, personal belongings, and things that the last people to touch them were living in the 17th century. And this is where the story of the Atocha becomes bigger than just gold. Because every piece coming out of the sea tells something about the people who were on the ship. Where were they carrying with them? What was their life like? And what happened in their final moments? And the strangest thing is that the sea is still giving up new pieces to this day. In 2026, more than 400 years after the Atocha sank, the search team recovered an entire silver bar weighing about 10 kilograms. And it was the first complete silver bar they had pulled from the site since 1999. That means 27 years without a single complete bar. And then suddenly, a 4-century-old piece emerges from under the sand. Think about it. After all the search equipment, all the divers, all the maps, and all the years, there was still a 10-kilogram piece that had been sitting on the seabed, and no one had reached it. And for me, this is the most beautiful part of the whole story, because it brings us back to Mel Fisher's old saying. The phrase he used to repeat every morning, even on the days his team came back empty-handed. Today is the day. Mel died in 1998, but nearly 28 years after his death, a team continuing the same pursuit pulled up a new bar from the Atocha, as if the phrase he used to repeat every day is still working. But if we reduce the story of the Atocha to just gold, we'd be doing it a disservice. The Atocha sank in 1622. Almost everyone on board died. The Spanish tried to reach it, but storms hid it away, and after more than 300 years, Mel Fisher chased it for 16 years. He lost his son, and he lost his daughter, and he lost one of his team members. He got into legal battle, and he kept going. In the end, he found the treasure, but he paid a price that can never be recovered. And that's why the real question in this story isn't how much the treasure was worth. The question is, if you were in Mel's shoes in 1975, after 6 years of searching, and after your son, your daughter-in-law, and one of your team members had died, and you still hadn't found the main cargo, what would you have done? Would you say enough is enough and get out of the sea? Or would you keep going because every piece of evidence around you is telling you that you're getting close? Because in this story specifically, the difference between the tragedy that could have been the end of everything and the 1985 discovery was 10 more years of searching.